Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein. And it's been a while. We were on a little bit of a hiatus, and we're going to take another little bit of a hiatus after we talk about our Super Bowl show because life is happening, right? Perry, you have a brand new job. Congratulations. That is very,
Thank
very
you.
exciting.
Thank you.
My background looks different because I am moving. Um, we've been here for 4.5 years of Pax What She Said, and we're moving into a new place. So Pax What She Said is going to take a brief pause while we adjust to new surroundings and new environments. And we'll be back the first week in March to talk about things like free agency. But we couldn't just completely disappear. We had to come on and do our normal Super Bowl show because we like doing it. It's a lot of fun, and it's the last football we're going to have for a while. So we have to talk about the game, even if it's the matchup that maybe nobody really wanted to see.
It's always the matchup nobody wants. That's what the Super Bowl is these days. Yes, I love this episode. When we talked about getting ready to do our Super Bowl episode, I was reminded every year how fun it is to take a look at the Super Bowl teams and look at what they have and what the Packers do not. Hopefully one of these days, one of these seasons soon, instead of this show, it will be a Super Bowl preview show because the Packers will be playing in it. However, for now, here we are. And should be an interesting one. This was a unique Packer season. The Packers did play and lose to the Eagles in the wild card round. The Eagles are why the Packers were booted from the playoffs. So I think this should be a fun one to look at. A little bit of now that we've had separation in space from that game too, maybe a bit of a moratorium. But here we are again, talking about the Kansas City Chiefs.
I know every year I go back and I look at my notes from last year's show, and it's just consecutively Kansas City Chiefs versus whoever. And of course, a couple years ago it was the Eagles, right? So they're right back in the thick of things. But I thought it was really interesting, and I guess this is where we can start, is looking at like the Eagles, I think, feel like a kind of juggernaut, right? Like we've seen what Saquon Barkley's doing. We've seen how that offense operates. They're 7th in points for, 2nd in points against. And I think the defense is what's been so notable because the Chiefs are 4th in points against. They're holding teams under or around 19 points a game. But their offense is 15th. And it was the same last year. They were like 14th or 15th in offense, and they still obviously won a Super Bowl against the 49ers, who had like a juggernaut offense. So the Chiefs feel like such an enigma because they're always in it, they're always contending, they always are very productive when it matters in these big moments, even if you could argue that the caliber of teams that they're playing has been better the last couple seasons.
My thing with the Chiefs is they have a very good defensive coordinator who is probably one of the best in-game adjusters and game planners for the specific opponent. Like Spags is not a one-trick pony. He is going to game plan very specifically and astutely for the opponent on the other side of the line of scrimmage from him. And so I think when you do everything you can on that side of the ball, and then on the flip side, you have Patrick Mahomes, who seemingly just needs to get just enough done to win a game and does it. Pat needs one or two like big key plays and big key moments, and he has proven time and time again that he will do those. Not like can, but will. You're going to win games. The Chiefs are winners. Like that's just what they are. They are the best situational football team. They are the best decision makers, and they have the most clutch guy that exists right now under center. And yes, it helps a ton, I think, when you have a fantastic defense. But we look at this every time you look at a team, you're like, well, it's great that you have a great defense, but what you really need to win championships these days is a great offense. And the Chiefs are just like the absolute like anti to that argument, right? Because they don't really have that great of an offense. They certainly didn't last year, and they definitely didn't this year. And yet somehow they had the best record in football. And here they are again in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think and that's what makes it kind of fun to go back and look at this repeatedly because they're somehow always in the thick of things. Like last year, one of the things that we talked about was red zone offense. The Packers really struggled last season in the red zone. And the Eagles and the 49ers and the Chiefs last year were really good in the red zone. This year, of these 3 teams, the Packers, Chiefs, and Eagles, the Packers actually have the best red zone efficiency. They ended the season at 10th. The Eagles are 13th, and then the Chiefs are all the way at 22nd in red zone efficiency. But they're second in efficiency on third down. So I think it goes down to that like ability to sustain drives and finish drives. So it's kind of funny that we always try to identify like where this Packers team needs to improve for the next season. And certainly one area of improvement, and we saw it throughout this regular season as well, was the red zone. Really struggled in the beginning half of the season, came out of the bye, really ended putting things together in the red zone. And sure enough, now that's an area that they've improved. But this year's Super Bowl teams, it doesn't seem to matter, right? Like it doesn't affect their success at all, even to be a team like the Chiefs that is 22nd in red zone efficiency.
It's such an interesting stat to look at because when I think of these 2 teams, I think about, like, how good they are. One is so good at the big play. Like, they have Saquon, who's so explosive, and I feel like every other game, like, you're not even close to the red zone, and Saquon is breaking off, like, a 40, 50,
Yeah.
60-year-old run, right? So, yeah, that stat says something, but not everything, and I love to hear, right, that the Packers improve. It's very important.
Mhm.
But it's not everything. Like points, total average points per game, things of that nature. Like where do those factor in? And it doesn't surprise me about the Chiefs. Like if you look at the season, they won what with the lowest point differential. I mean, how many games? I mean, again, the Packers did too. It's not like this is not a comparison point, but just to like the point of the stat, how many games did they win on a last second field goal?
Mhm.
That has not, that they did not look automatic in the red zone. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but again, like they just win. They just find ways to do just enough to win. And when you're not playing in a best out of 3, best out of 5 situation like some other sports, you just have to win one game. It works for them.
I want to ask you about this before we kind of dive into the comparisons between the rosters. I know obviously that you listen to friend of the show, Mina Kimes podcast, as well as I do, featuring Lenny, of course. And they had an episode where they kind of looked at every playoff team and where they thought the position deficiency was that would get them over the hump and get them to the Super Bowl. So the Packers, they had said kind of the front 4, front 6, your D line and your edge rush, or the wide receiving core. And I thought that was really interesting because I think that's a conversation to have when we compare these rosters. But what were your thoughts on that? Because I think that identifying both of those 2 positions, either one of them could have been the selection.
I mean, it's what I would choose too. Um, I don't think this offense was nearly as automatic as it should have been or could have been this season. And a lot of that, yeah, is due to like wide receiver drops and wide receiver error and wide receiver regression. Just I don't particularly think the guys who stood out in the 2023 season were the same this season by any stretch of the imagination. If you're thinking about Dontavian Wicks or like, Jaden Reed. So, but they also don't have an elite pass rusher, but at the same token, if you look at that final Eagles game, it wasn't the defense that lost them that game. Like the defense played really well and stopped, an offense that we're talking about is like one of the best, if not the best in the league, who's now playing in the Super Bowl. So they had the horses to do it. It was just a slog at times this season. So but then you compare again, and, like, I don't think the Chiefs have a 1. They
Right.
did,
That's
but
where I
he's
was going
hurt.
with that. Yeah.
Right. He's on IR, so they're somehow finding ways to win again without a 1. So, I don't know if there's necessarily a formula. If that's a really maybe a cop-out answer. I think it has to do with, like, each individual team and what their strengths are, and unfortunately, this season, due to the number of variables I just mentioned, the offense took a step back. We can also talk a little bit about like Jordan Love took a step back and he was hurt, and there was a lot of like roller coaster when it came to who was playing under center with his time away and Malik Willis, et cetera, just like lack of repetition and reps and time with his guys. So I agreed with her 100%. I think she threw corner in there as well as like a third, which I would too. Do I think that if the Packers had an AJ Brown or a Myles Garrett, that they would be playing in this game? I don't know. I don't think there's any kind of magic fix. No.
I like that you threw Myles Garrett in there specifically because that is, I think, the dream for a lot of people. Myles Garrett has been my favorite.
I also know how much you love him.
Yeah. Marrying a Browns fan helps. There's not a lot to root for in Cleveland these days. So Myles Garrett leaving is making it so much worse. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a good segue too, because when you look at, we talked about the Eagles offense, right? They have AJ Brown, they have Devontae Smith, they have Saquon Barkley. Jalen Hurts can make things happen with his leg. They also have like one of the best offensive lines in football. They have a tight end who, when he's healthy, is in that conversation as like a top 5 tight end. And then you go to the Chiefs offense and they have the best center in football, arguably. Creed Humphrey is fantastic. They have the best quarterback in football. But everywhere else, it's kind of like replacement parts. Thuney's a good left tackle. He's solid. Isaiah Pacheco is a good a good running back. He was hurt for a lot of the season. Travis Kelce is still Travis Kelce. He's the Mahomes security blanket. But yeah, to your point and Mina's argument about receivers, as much as we'd like to see the Packers invest a little more at the position, the Chiefs are the exact reason why you don't really need to, because they're making it work. And of course, it helps when the guy throwing them the ball is doing what he's doing. But I was curious, so I looked at PFF numbers, and I know these aren't the gospel, right? But Jaden Reed was 49th out of 133 receivers. Dobbs was 55th, and Christian Watson was 59th. So all three of their starting receivers were right in that kind of lump of like the bottom of the top third, right in the 40-50 range. No one in the Chiefs lineup is ranked. Worthy is 60th at this point. But then you have like Juju Smith-Schuster is 99th out of 133. And I know these are, again, replacement parts, but it's tough to make the argument that there's something missing from this Packers roster when we're seeing what the Chiefs are doing with the missing pieces.
But I think that's why the Chiefs are really frustrating, to me at least, as someone just like a football watcher. Like, I know that there's some people who are like, I think that what they're doing is incredible and magic. I feel kind of the opposite. I feel like what they're doing is really frustrating, because any other team, not just the Packers, the Bills, the Ravens, like any other team that's trying to make it to the big dance, who like arguably deserves it and has all the important parts, right? The quarterback, the strong to very good offensive line, the top 15 defense, the offensive weapons that you would need, whether it's, a running back somewhere, some kind of like elevated tight end, all those teams have those parts. And yet somehow, some way, to your point, rankings, all of it, the Chiefs just figure it out. And like, I don't know, again, Mahomes is amazing, but can you argue, maybe it's a hot take, can you argue that he's so much better than Lamar and Josh Allen, who were like our MVP candidates this year? Like, that he elevates those, respectfully, like nobodies on his offensive roster more than those other quarterbacks do, to the point that he gets them to where they are? Is it Andy Reid, right? Is it play calling? Is it just having someone, back there who says, I know exactly how to use my guys in the perfect way, in the perfect moment, that Harbaugh and the Bills coach, who I'm like totally blanking on his name right now.
Sean
McDermott, thank you. Don't have, that Matt doesn't have. We believe Matt has it. I know Bills fans have a really hard time with Sean McDermott. Harbaugh's been the coach for such a long time. Like, he's probably got to have it. So I don't have an answer for the Chiefs. Like, I really don't.
I don't think anyone does.
Yeah. What do you think about this?
I feel the same. And I mean, I think that that's, trying to find and replicate the magic formula doesn't work because they're the exception, not the rule. So it's hard to try to model what they're doing because again, last season they were like the 15th ranked offense, not putting up a ton of points and still went out and had success against a really good 49ers team. And that just I think Andy Reid has a lot to do with that. I think that, like you said, Spags has a ton to do with that because those are just two really, really good coordinators and that elevates your team. And I think again, Mahomes is smart enough, a really good football mind to have guys in players to be successful and have like just enough magic to make things happen and extend plays in a frustrating capacity. So 31 other teams aren't able to do it, right? Like that's kind of what the Chiefs have going for them. But it does make it really interesting to try to compare weaknesses and deficiencies because the Chiefs somehow are like the only squad that is able to turn their deficiencies into non-negotiables and everything else, it kind of implodes for the other teams. And maybe that's where we shift if you're okay with shifting to the defense.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I think that this is where it gets really interesting, right? We thought that Jeff Hafley had a really good first season as defensive coordinator. Xavier McKinney came in and, Josh Jacobs credit too for what he's done for the Packers offense, but the free agent signings were massive. We talked about Evan Williams as a draft pick, Edrin Cooper somehow graded out as like the 4th overall linebacker by PFF standards and inside linebacker. So that's super exciting and promising, to see the trajectory that we think he'll be on. But then going back to, again, the Mina identifiers, what do both of these teams have really, really strong defensive fronts? You've got Jalen Carter for the Eagles. You've got Chris Jones for the Chiefs. And the Packers' best interior defender is Kenny Clark at 55 out of 126 defensive linemen. Yeah, and it was a down year for Kenny, but
he had a tough year.
It was a rough year. They really needed him to be more effective than he was.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like on the back end too, I think you've got, the Eagles have a fantastic secondary, through and through, all starters, and the Chiefs have McDuffie, who's like one of the best corners in the league. The front's a tough one for me because I remember very distinctly having this same conversation with this same matchup last time they played when the Eagles had an incredibly special defensive front that season. Historic numbers, pressure, QB hits, sack rating, all of it. They were like doing it at like 85 Bears level, right? Just like absolutely monstrous. And it ended up not mattering. So again, like, do I think that the Packers need to gain blue chip players where it matters? Of course, they are clearly missing. Whatever has happened with Rashawn since he tore his ACL, he's clearly not that guy. LVN has not shown that he's that guy since they drafted him. You need that dude up front to like just collapse pockets. They have had that guy in the secondary, and they do in safety version. And I think we both feel very high on the rookies based on what we saw this season. And I think, to your point earlier, Jeff Hafley did he overexceeded expectations first year. But now CB1 is a huge question mark. And I think even when Jair did play this season, he sometimes looked like himself and sometimes he didn't. So we should, and regardless, like the other boundary, Nixon he stepped up in a huge way. He looked great, but Nixon's an average boundary corner who had to be great in some moments and wasn't in others. So the Packers need a blue chip guy there no matter what. Even if Jair was coming back, you need two. So I think like these are easy conversations to be having, like irrespective of who was playing in the Super Bowl this Sunday.
Yeah, and I mean, we had a similar conversation on Pack a Day a couple weeks ago, trying to identify areas of weakness for this Packers team, and unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the player, but nickel, I think, is a big conversation piece because obviously Cooper DeJean is the Eagles nickel, and I know how everybody felt about Cooper DeJean on draft night, and it's a draft crush that got away. So certainly not trying to say that the Packers could have used him specifically, but to your point, Jai Alexander barely played this season, and he finished the year with a grade of 17 out of 118 corners for PFF. So losing that certainly makes a difference. Keyshawn Nixon as a boundary corner was 63rd out of
Yeah,
118. And then in the
average.
slot, unfortunately, Javon Bullard had to take a lot of lumps as a rookie nickel, and he finished 80th out of 98 safeties for a grade. And then again, you look at DeJean, I think he finished like third out of corners. And Trent McDuffie ended up playing on the boundary quite a bit for the Chiefs this year, but their slot corner graded out at like 40th or something. So, I mean, still, you need production everywhere. And we talk about it during draft season every year that nickel is becoming such a focal point of every defense. It's basically your base defense that at some point you just draft a nickel corner. You stop trying to fit round pegs and square holes.
Yeah, I feel like I said
Square
this
pegs, round
before.
holes.
I feel like I said this before last draft. I
Mhm.
feel like I've said this last 2 drafts, so I'm with you. I feel for Javon Bullard because that's not his position,
Right.
right? He's not a nickel corner. He's a safety, and he got put into a position where he had to play. I would have loved to have seen the secondary in its truest form. People like to say that we did. We didn't. I mean, look at this defense in the first half of the season versus the second half of the season. It was like almost a night and day difference. They ended up top 10 besides losing Jair. I I just think when you have guys playing out of position and they're still grading out, I mean, to Nixon's point, like average, think about how well they would be playing if they were playing where they were meant to be. So it's just unfortunate, but it's also the NFL and it's just how things go. Like you said, McDuffie went and had to play on the boundary, and he's really their slot guy. So things have to move around, but the corners just now a huge need. Not to the point where safety was last season, where it's like, are we gonna have ghosts on the field? But I think multiple is what is gonna have to target this season to be competitive, like to be at all competitive.
All right. I have no other positions, I think, at this point that are glaring, right? There's a lot of arrows trending upward. We could talk about the offensive line, I guess, potentially.
I was gonna
But
say, I think the offensive line is the last place I'd go. Just I've been thinking about them a lot. And my thought here, I mean, I don't know where the Chiefs offensive line grades out. I think, I mean, you already touched on some of their better starters, but I certainly would guesstimate that the Packers are at best second, if not third in that order, given that the Eagles certainly have the best offensive line. And I'm wondering, I don't know. I mean, Rodgers always played behind great offensive lines, if not solid offensive lines, and always had one of the best left tackles in football protecting his blind side. I think at minimum, this offensive line needs retooling and some upgrades. And at maximum, I would like to see major changes. I know some people think Rasheed Walker is fine. I think they need a major upgrade at left tackle, whether they already have him on the roster and drafted in Jordan Morgan, or whether they need to go and draft another offensive tackle or lineman, period. It's the most important part of this offense. And we saw it with the run game. Like they did great things in the run game and in run blocking. But Jordan Love is a quarterback that if he is rattled and cannot get set and cannot get his footwork right, things go crazy awry. So for him, he's not a Rodgers, he's not a Mahomes. He can't like be in the air making magic. He has to be protected. And I just don't think this offensive line cut it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Zach Tom, looks the part of a franchise right tackle. Unfortunately, probably played his worst game in Philly, but that tends to happen when you get bounced from the playoffs, right? I mean, really, really solid season from him. Josh Myers, like we said, is a free agent. We'll see. It sounds like the Packers kind of want him back, but they
Really?
have Jacob Monk on the roster. They also, have a number of draft picks coming. I agree with you about left tackle. I'd be curious to see Jordan Morgan get the bulk of those reps and kind of go into training camp and get to play the entire camp at tackle instead of guard. And the injury didn't help, right? And the
Right.
rotating with Sean Ryan. Like, there's a lot of things that the Packers, I think, are still searching for a best five. And of course, now taking Josh Myers out of the equation adds another piece of, uncertainty, which is not what you want. But they'll draft some guys, of course, and then, we'll see who they trot out there. But any final thoughts on this one?
I'm just gonna comment on that real quick. I'm like fine with not having Josh Myers back. I don't think that he's like a I mean, he hasn't shown at least that he's a serviceable or like above average center. So I think like I mean, if you need to make some changes there, like that's fine. I think you have your two solid anchors in Elton and Tom, and Sean Ryan proved that he should start, and you replace your center and you have competition at left tackle, and you could really build a very, very solid offensive line. But your offensive line is only as good as its weakest link, and the weakest link being your center is not great. So I don't know. I'm actually, it surprises me. It would surprise me if he was back on like a legitimate deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of a fair way to end. We know that Goody certainly prioritizes his homegrown talent. On Pack a Day, like a month ago at this point, we looked at way too early free agents, and Drew Dahlman of the Falcons was the player that I picked. He's their center. He's like a top 5 center in the NFL and just a mauler in the run game. Feels like an upgrade, right? So we'll see what the Packers do with their money. We'll talk about it a ton when we get back in March and free agency is upon us. But again, the Packers have the draft coming up in April in Green Bay. Going to be a ton of fun to talk about it. But really quick, before we wrap this one up, score prediction for the Super Bowl. Who do you have walking away with this one?
I don't care. I just want a good game, to be honest. Like I want it to be like 38-35. I just simply don't care. I do not care about the three-peat because you need to caveat that by Super Bowl era because the Packers have done that already in the non-Super Bowl era. So please make sure you asterisk that. Thank you. I don't like the Eagles, but I am a Saquon Barkley fan, so
I was
like
gonna say,
maybe it's fine if it's Saquon, like run it out, win. I just truly don't care. I just like want it to be a fun game to watch.
yeah. I mean, I think I don't like Nick Sirianni, but I like Jalen Hurts. I like Saquon Barkley. Like, it'd be cool to see him win one after the way that the Giants kind of treated him on the way out. Like, but I think we'll just root for 2 new teams next year, right? Something a little bit different. But that is all the time that we have for today's show. Thank you so much for bearing with us here as we come back from hiatus and now go on an extended hiatus, but we'll see you in March. Enjoy the Super Bowl, and then we'll have a little bit of break from football before we dive into free agency and the draft. It's all going to be here before you know it, honestly.
Yeah, well, I would like to explain that our past hiatus was because Maggie and I were both very ill. So you didn't want us to podcast.
You would not have been able to understand a thing we said.
No, we had all the viruses, but this upcoming one is planned. So we will be back for free agency. We can't wait. We will still be on our other various shows, and we'll be refreshed and ready to go for the off season.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find the show everywhere at Pax What She Said. And you can find Perry at Perry_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. Thank you so much for listening and hanging out with us. And we'll be back soon. Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.